Microsoft Azure Pakistan Community May 2023 meetup. And today I will start with highlighting some of the housekeeping rules. We plan to meet up online at least once a month on Saturdays, and we have slightly changed the format of our meeting. Now we will be holding our meetings using the Skype, and the online meetings would be recorded, and later the recording would be uploaded to Microsoft Azure Pakistan Community YouTube channel. And I would request you all to please mute yourself during the meeting. And the meetup time would be around 1 hour to 1 hour and 30 minutes, depending upon the time needed by the respective speaker. And there would be 10-15 minutes for QA session in the end. So please ask your questions in the QA session, and it would be also good if you can write your questions in the chat window. Microsoft Azure Pakistan community is a part of Azure Tech Groups, so we follow the code of conduct of the Azure Tech Groups, which is that you should be friendly and welcoming, be patient, be thoughtful in how you communicate in person and online, be respectful and inclusive, be open and curious, and reach out to the organizers if you need anything. Today we have the honor of having Daniel with us, who will be telling us about how to audit your AKS cluster using Gatekeeper and Azure Policy. And I was looking forward to this session for quite a long time, so I'm also very excited to hear about it. And you would have wondered that why all these pods, what all these pods are doing inside your AKS cluster, where do they all come from? So in this session, Daniel will show you how you can use Open Policy Agent Gatekeeper to enforce policies. He will show you how to get started, and he will work on some basic policies. If you have some policies, he will show you how you can use Azure Policy to verify and enforce the policies on your AKS cluster while giving the developers the freedom they like and the security teams the visibility they need. So what would be the learning from this session is that you will leave this session with an overview of Gatekeeper and have an idea how Gatekeeper will be able to help you audit and enforce your policies. And this session would be delivered by Daniel Paulus, and Daniel is a conference organizer and a meetup runner. And as a principal consultant at Beyound Blue, a Microsoft Azure focused consultancy company, and he's also a Microsoft Azure MVP, and he's helping companies in to succeed with cloud native technologies and Azure DevOps practices. So thank you very much, Daniel, for your precious time, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation to come up to this forum and enlighten us with your knowledge around AKS. So please, you can go ahead with sharing your session and sharing your screen.
Thank you so much for having me. I will start up my presentation. And I'll see how I can I am not allowed to share my screen in the Zoom settings. Yeah, now I am.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And I want to share the screen. Okay. So, thank you all for joining or watching this later on YouTube. I'm going to show you how you can audit your AKS clusters with use of Gatekeeper and Azure Policy. This is what we're going to talk about today. So first, I'm going to talk about some definitions so that we all know for sure what we talk about. After that, we're going to zoom in what is Open Policy Agent, what is admission control, then look into Gatekeeper, look into Azure Policy, and in the end, show you how you can test this with ConfTest. So let's dive right in. My naam is Daniel Paulus. I'm an Azure MVP and a consultant at Beyond Blue. You can find me on Twitter and on GitHub. If you're watching, I'd love to get a tweet from you or a DM on Twitter if you have any questions or things to remark. It's always open, and I love to have some interaction with you there. So why am I talking today? I started in IT in 2008. Did a little sidestep in Ruby development, but came back to operations. And I loved to work with Docker since it was announced in 2013. Then came the announcement from Microsoft that they love open source in 2014, which for me was the starting point to dive into Azure, look into Azure, start to work with it. And in 2017 I did my first Kubernetes installation, and ever since that time I'm hooked. So I work with containers and Kubernetes on a daily basis. So let's define what a policy is. For me, to make it simple, it's a set of ideas that have been agreed upon by a bunch of people, which basically means that a policy can be different for a wide range of people, as long as in a particular group it means the same thing. So you can have a policy within your company or even within your team, but also within your country. This is policy. Now, what is governance? For me, it's the management or the control of the activities in an organization. It means way more, it's way bigger, but this is to set the stage for this talk. It's about the control over the activities in your organization. So why would you want to work with policies and with governance? We basically want to make sure that the end users of a Kubernetes cluster are working in such a way that we as a platform team can understand what's happening. There can be many teams out there, and they can all do their own little software and their own builds, and they run their own containers, and as a platform team I have no idea what's running. But I am kind of responsible for what's happening on the cluster, so I need safeguards in order to make sure that if something breaks, I need to be able to first off find out who it's from. So one of the things that we can do if we start to work with policies is we can enforce the fact that someone has to include a label in their deployment that contains their contact details, so that if I see a pod going OOM kill, so it has not enough memory, I can contact the specific team and tell them something is going on, we have to have a look at this. With the use of a policy, we can enforce that they put this label in their deployments and in their pod. So we always know for sure that it's there. In order to do this, we are going to use a tool called Open Policy Agent, short for OPA. And to give you a small joke, I'm Dutch, and in Dutch, OPA means grandparent, which is kind of funny if you think about that he is the enforcer of the policy. And the Open Policy Agent is open source. You can just look this up on GitHub. It's not from Microsoft. They are working with it, and they contribute back to it, but it's not made by Microsoft. It's also a engine that can do more than what we're using it for today. So I recommend you to look into it, to see all the fun things that you can do with it, and you might be able to use it for something else as well. And OPA is also known as Gatekeeper, but that's the deployment part, which we're going to talk about later. And this engine is using a language called Rego, and Rego is hard to read. It's difficult, and this is an example of a piece of code that will block an deployment as an image is being pulled from an untrusted repo. So as soon as the image is being pulled from our own domain, so from our own repo, it's allowed to run. And as soon as it's not starts with, so let's say you pull an image from Docker Hub, then the image will be denied because it's from an untrusted source. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to switch over. Let me see if this works. Switch over Zoom to my VS Code. Therefore, I think I have to. Yeah, I have to stop the presentation, go to Zoom, and share. Let me see where it is. This one. Please let me know if you now see my VS Code. So what I've done, I have installed a package called Open Policy Agent. This is the one, which will help you to create, test, and debug policies. And it gives you a bunch of options, but it will basically give syntax highlighting, and we can evaluate packages. That's what I'm going to show you now. So basically we have this Rego file, and this Rego file says if the deployment has a label which defines the owner, it's good. But if it's not there, then we must provide an owner. So the input file that we are going to use is this example YAML file, and that will be put into JSON and then feed into OPA. So let me show you what's going to happen. If we now run this rule against this JSON file, we will get no warnings and no denies, because as you can see in the metadata there is labels, and here's the owner, that's me. But if I now remove this, let's do it here also to make sure. Oh. And we now gonna run this again, we get an error that we must provide an owner. There are two types of packages that you can make. You can make a deny and you can make a warning. So if you have something that is allowed to happen, but you would advise otherwise, then you can make a warn. But if you really want to enforce something, you should use deny. Okay, let's continue. Stop share. And now I want to continue this. Share. And now the presentation is back. So how are we going to do this? As you can see on this diagram, as soon as we want to deploy something to the Kubernetes API, it's going to do a bunch of steps. So first it's going to check the authentication. And if the authentication is okay, it's going to check your RBAC. So it's going to make sure that you have the right to deploy something into the Kubernetes cluster. That's done by role-based access control. But as soon as that's also okay, we're gonna hit a part of the API server called dynamic admission control. And that's basically, that consists out of two side pieces. One is the validating controller and the other one is the mutating controller. If we use Gatekeeper, we're going to use the validating one. And what it's going to do is it's going to use a webhook to make an API call. And what we're going to do is we're going to call the Gatekeeper container that's running, that endpoint, and we're going to ask, is it okay if we deploy this? And then it's going to look into the rules that we have defined. And as you just saw, when there's no deny and no warn, it is going to say, this is fine, you can continue. As soon as there's a deny, it's going to block the request. And it's not going to deploy. And it will give the error back to you. So in your terminal, you will see that you're not allowed to deploy this because something with your deployment is wrong. As soon as we go into the demo, you will see this. We're gonna again jump into VS Code. Let me see if I can. Here's the one. So what is gonna happen is we're gonna send a review object which contains a lot of information, like the name of the deployment, what we're gonna do, like create, update. It contains the namespace, but it also has information on who you are. And all this information will be used in order to validate if what you want to do is okay. And then it gives a response back. And the only thing that we care about is allowed is true. So that's the only thing it returns. You can build whatever tools you want in order to look into what's coming in, if that's okay. If you want to do that, you can use any language that you want, like Python or whatever. And in the end, the only thing you have to send back is a JSON object with response allowed true. So you can make really complex admission flows. I would advise against that, but this is what OPA and Gatekeeper are doing behind the scenes. moving back to the presentation. Working. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about Gatekeeper. Gatekeeper is a customizable admission webhook, like I just showed you in the picture, and it basically is an API. And you send the web or the web request into the API. It makes a decision to admit or deny what you want to do, and then it continues to flow. Gatekeeper is a friendly way to deploy Open Policy Agent into your Kubernetes cluster. It also makes it easy to deploy because we don't have to build our own admission flow. And it gives you a bunch of CRDs, like the constraint templates that I will show you in the demo. And with those templates, we can define our own policies. So there's a huge open source repo with all kinds of standard things that you would like to do, but you can also use your own constraints. And you can start off small, or you can just go full out and have a policy for almost everything, which I would advise against because it should still be workable, but you have the option to do this. So now just dive in, because I talk a lot, but just show you, which will make it probably a lot easier. Then again, we will go into VS Code, and then I will just do this. Okay, I already made a Kubernetes cluster, which is completely empty. There's nothing there. And it's also a really small AKS cluster with just one node. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna install Gatekeeper. And just gonna show you what is in there. So this is everything we need for Gatekeeper, but it's also the CRDs, and it's a bunch of scrolling. But what this will do is it will set up everything we need in order to use Gatekeeper and to define our own policies. You could just download this from the Gatekeeper installation specifications, which you can find on GitHub. I haven't tested this against this version. And as you now see, it created a bunch of resources. Yeah, and it might be a problem, but we will see later on. And as you, I should have tested this. Live debugging. Okay, gonna do. This is what I expected. So I now just took the Gatekeeper installation specification from their GitHub page. Don't do this in production. Make sure that you know what you install in your cluster. But for this demo, I now know for sure that this will work. Because now we have Gatekeeper CRDs, which we need in order to show you the rest of the demo. Let me see if the pods are starting. Yeah. So as you can see, there's now a bunch of containers starting within the Gatekeeper namespace. And to give you an idea, the Audit container is the one that actually doing the auditing of the policies, and the controllers are the ones that are being hit by the API call that is coming through the admission controller. As you can see, the auditing is complete. There are no constraints found yet because we haven't made a constraint from a policy yet. So now let's show you a constraint. And a constraint is basically a rego file, but then translated into YAML. So, oh, it's a bit too big. So what we basically do is we say, well, all pods must have an owner, so there should be an owner label that points to your company username, and we have made it into a regex that defines how this name should look like, and this is being used for each pod that is deployed. We will check the labels and see if there is an owner label, and then if the value of the owner label looks like this regex. So we basically do two checks. We first check if there is a label, and then we check if the content of the label is sufficient for what we expect it to be there. So you can also force a certain style of content. Then we also have something called a template. And a template is specifying what we expect there to be. So in order to say, okay, this is required labels, then we need to define how this is looking, and then we here is the place where we use the Rego language. So we define how the message should look like, and then here is evaluation. And then we tell it, well, there's the missing label. And this is something which is different from what I showed you in the beginning, because here we look at a review object instead of the actual input YAML. So in the review object, look into the metadata, look into the labels, and then look into the keys. And if it's not there, block. And here we have the key, but then we check if the regex is there. So most of this code can be found on GitHub in the Rego and in the OPA documentations, because this can be overwhelming, especially on the first time when you look at this. But don't let it scare you. There's a bunch of resources that you can use in order to find these objects and read through it and try to understand what you read, but it can be overwhelming. So what we're now gonna do is we're gonna first deploy the template. And so we now have a constraint template, which we can also ask so we see now that it's there. So we're now gonna deploy the constraint itself. And that's now deployed. Okay, so now we're gonna now we are gonna deploy a let me show you a pod that will fail, and that will fail as there's no label here. It's just Nginx in a different namespace, no labels, nothing. So if we deploy this pod, we will get a forbidden back from the API server, and it tells us that all pods must have an owner. And then we also have the nice label for us that we can understand what's going on. So if I now deploy a pod which is good, with a label called owner, which will adhere to the regex that we made, it will create it because it has a label called owner, and it will start fine because everything is there that should be there. So if we take this it's not in the demo, but if we take this a level further, we can use the mutating webhook, which was part of the admission controller. We can also change objects that we send to the Kubernetes cluster or to the Kubernetes API. So we could also add a specific label or add something to the deployment to make sure that if someone doesn't understand and deploys a random container, we can add a a disk or a label or whatever we want to do to the object, we can add that with the mutating webhook controller. But that's maybe a topic for a different talk. At least you know that you have that opportunity. Let's go back to the presentation. Okay, so what I've just shown you is that we by hand install Gatekeeper, by hand create a policy, and we have to do quite a bit of work in order to get everything going, get everything set up, and you have to understand what you're doing in order to create these policies. Now, is there a nice thing from Azure which is already there called Azure Policy, which has a bunch of policies already for your Azure environment, like you should enable PIM and you should enable FMA if you're an administrator account. And if you deploy a VM, you should enable backups. All those kind of policies are already there. So what Microsoft did is they enabled this policy engine for Gatekeeper. So they basically took Gatekeeper, added that into AKS, and made the policy engine Azure Policy. So they took all the policies that they think are relevant, put that into Azure Policy, to Gatekeeper, and made it an add-on on your Kubernetes setup for AKS. And they now made it a centralized and consistent tool for all your AKS installations throughout your entire company, because you can enforce this. I'm gonna once again do a demo in which I will show you how you can enable this for let's make this big. I now switched over to a clean AKS cluster with nothing on there, nothing is installed, it's completely clean. And now we're gonna enable the add-on Azure Policy for the AKS cluster called Policy in Azure Group Gatekeeper. This is the only thing that you have to do to enable Azure Policy on your AKS cluster. Now, let's give this a short moment. And in the meantime, I will switch over to this one. So this is the policy engine that you get in Azure by default. And the standard assessment, this is just for my standard subscription. I have a lot of issues that I need to fix, but I don't do PIM and all that kind of stuff in my own personal subscription. But what I wanted to show you is that we can find oh no, oh yeah, here it is. It takes a while to load. There is a lot of policies in there. And what we can do is we can filter the category, look for Kubernetes, and this is the list that we now can choose from. So as you can see, there's a whole lot of options. So let's filter on label, because we want to make sure to add a label. And then there's a policy called pods should use specified labels. And this is basically the exact same one as we just made in OPA, but then it's made by Azure. And I think if I go to this, yeah, you will probably, so let's zoom in a bit. So now it looks as something we have seen in the previous demo, because this is just a constraint template that specifies what we want to check, and then it has a rego definition that states, hey, you must provide these labels, and they are now missing. So in the end, again, it's just rego language. So if you're starting to look into this, I highly recommend that you also have a look into rego and have some understanding about how this works and what you're trying to do. But as you could see, there is an immense amount of checks that we can do. So if we look, for example, the image, should only use allowed images is the one that that I showed you the screenshot of, and this is the one that specifies you may only pull from my own known and trusted ACR or other registry that I want to pull images from. Let's go back to VS Code. It's now done with the installation, and you can also see this, because now it outputs that there's an add-on profile which is called Azure Policy, which is now deployed on the AKS cluster. You can also do this with Bicep or with Terraform if you'd like, so you don't have to use the CLI to do it. And what we now have is the same Gatekeeper system namespace with an audit container and 2 controllers. We haven't done anything, we just enabled the add-on. So by using this add-on, the installation of Gatekeeper is done for us, instead of that we have to manually deploy this and manually enable this. Get CRD. So we also now have the CRDs, and let me see, I don't think yeah, so by default we have already a bunch of constraint templates that are here, but it's not everything. So there is nothing here to enforce our label. So if I now deploy the pod fail, it will just deploy it, because why not? We haven't specified that we want to have this label. So go back to Azure. We now gonna create a policy. Label, and this is the one. Should use owner label, and I want to enable it. Okay, next. This is fine, and now I want to deny it, and I want to and this should be owner. Okay. Why is this invalid? Smith, and this should be it should be owner. And I don't want to do an automatic thing to it, and I just want to create it. It's now created. So now if I check this one, we should, it can take a while before it gets there. That's the downside of how this works. Yeah, okay, so it takes a while before this gets applied to the Gatekeeper system. Yeah, because it's now only, yeah, it hasn't updated yet. So it updates once in a while. Let me see if I reapply this. Yeah, it still works. So what should happen is that this pod again gets a fail, but it will take some time for the policy in Azure will sync back to Gatekeeper, and that's due to the way that the policy engine works. You will also, so if you run this in audit mode, it can take up to a day before you actually see the audit in Azure, which I still think it's not great, but at least you have visibility in what's going on in your cluster, and your security team can see this. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. So if we now have all this going on, you might say like, okay, Daniel, so this looks all nice and stuff, but how do we shift this left? Like, I want to know before I deploy my container to the Kubernetes cluster, I want to know if it's valid or not. So how can we do this? How can we get this into our CI/CD pipeline? Well, you can. There's this tool called conftest, and conftest lets you write Rego style code and validate it against a JSON file. So this is not only Kubernetes specifications. You can use this for any JSON file. So if your application is doing anything with JSON and you want to validate it, you can also use this, which brings other opportunities. But you can use conftest to check certain things. So let me go once again back to VS Code. Here we are, and this is the one. So this is really old. Extensions V1, Beta 1 will no longer be in use in V1 20. At this time we are at, I think, V1 2.5 or even 2.6, and I think Alpha is already 2.7. But this will give you an idea on how this works, and this will also help you if you are still on a very old AKS or a Kubernetes. You can use this to migrate to the new specifications. Because what are we specifying here? If the kind is ingress and the API version that you still want to use is extensions V1 Beta 1, then we're gonna tell you as a warning, hey folks, what you're trying to do is end of life. It's gonna be removed, so please don't do this anymore. Same thing we're gonna do for RBAC. Is this the exact same thing? Yeah. Ignore this last one. It's the same one as this, but you will get the idea. Like, if you have a kind with a certain type, you can validate certain other objects, like the API version that you're trying to use. So if I now look at my ingress, it is using extensions V1 Beta 1. So we know that this is old. This is not going to work. So let's show you what's going to happen. There's a binary called conftest. You can install this from their GitHub page or with Brew or anything that you like, and it gives you a bunch of help if you'd like to. And what we want to do is we want to do a verify. And we just the one. This is the one. So we want to test. So we want to test the configuration file that we have, and we want to test that with Open Policy Agent. So we input the ingress.yaml as test, and then we tell conf-test to use the policies that we have defined in the policy folder here, and use that as the test case. Oh, that's wrong here. So now you will see that we have a warn, and it will tell us that it's going to be deprecated. So please use networking v1 beta 1 instead. So let's update our ingress. And try again. And as you can see right now, we are valid against the test case. So one of the ways you can use this, it will happen sometimes that when we upgrade from 1.25 to 1.26 or 1.27, that APIs change. So we go from beta to standard, or we lose certain APIs. We can write a policy, as you can see here, and we can advise teams like, hey, for now this is good, but in the really near future this is going to be end of life, so you please use this. And if you then take a few weeks to warn, you can then in the end go over to block or to deny. And at that point their test will fail in the CI pipeline. Instead of warn, we will just go red and say you can't deploy anymore. You have to fix this now in order for us to make sure that we can migrate to the new Kubernetes version. But you can also use the same conf test to check if your deployment is valid against all the policies that we have defined. So we make sure that you have this label called owner with your company details in there. Let's go back to my presentation. This was it. If you scan this QR code, you will find my website. On this website there are 4 blog posts about OPA, Rigo, Policy Agent, everything that I just shown you. And you can read more about it. So have a look there. And if there are any questions, feel free to ask them.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for a very informative session. I have a few questions that I would like to ask.
Sure.
What do you think if you compare Gatekeeper with Kaiwato? How easy or how difficult it is to use? Because I mean, it looks like that Gatekeeper is a great tool, but I also believe that since you need to have some kind of skills in Rigo. So on the other hand, if you compare it with Kaiwato, then how do you think that?
Yeah, so they are different. They are both rule-based engines. So in this, they are the same, but they have a different approach. So Gatekeeper is using OPA, and OPA is using Rigo. And it's specifically the language that's different. So why have I taken a look into Gatekeeper and OPA? That's only because Azure Policy works the same way. So you cannot use Kivero for Azure Policy. And that's why I used this approach. If you have no bindings with Azure Policy, so you just run your own Kubernetes cluster or in another cloud, I'd say OPA might not be the easiest one, so you might use the other one. And that's mainly because the configuration is done differently. with a different syntax, which is easier to read if you understand YAML. So that for me is the difference. And you can do cool things like if there's a secret that is generated in a specific namespace by an operator, make a duplication of that secret into another namespace with a different like layout so that your application can use that or whatever. Like it's more as a rule-based automation tool than a policy tool. So it does more.
Okay. What do you suggest that how easy it would be for medium-sized organizations that are using Kubernetes to adapt to Gatekeeper?
The standalone version of Gatekeeper, so the self-built one, is quite hard because you have to define all the policies, think about how you're going to implement them, and so if you are on Azure, I would always suggest you use the policy from Azure and the add-on, because that will just simplify your life. If you are not and you want to start with Gatekeeper, start in audit mode. So what I show you today is block mode, but you can run this in audit mode as well, and then it will simply output to a log, and then your operations team can like go through the list and see what's blocking. Because if you just deploy this on block mode, a lot will break, especially if your CISO is going to say like, yeah, I want to have everything, I want to block this, I want to have no untrusted images, I want to have all the labels that I can think of. It's gonna break everything. But if you run in audit mode, you will get a nice list of the things that will break, and you can first try to fix that and talk with the organization like, hey folks, I see you still pull this image from Docker Hub. Let's not do that anymore. Let's fix this before you're gonna go into block mode.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for a very informative session. And can you please also send the URL for this library that you downloaded from Git?
Oh yeah, sure.
In the chat session so that I could also put it in the description of this video.
Yes, I think I did close it. Let me open it up again. So this is the installation doc. I use this installation document in order to download the kubectl apply of Gatekeeper that I used in the first demo. The entire like documentation of Gatekeeper, so you can just go step by step and see what it does, and it will also tell you like, okay, step 1, step 2.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Is there anything that you would like to say in the end or to conclude anything?
No, it's great. I hope that people like it and that they read my blog for more information about it.
Can you please also send the URL for your blog so that I can also put it in the description?
Definitely, yes.
Video?
Yes.
That would
It is danielpaulus.com, and it's now in the chat.
got this.
And can you send me an email when the video is up?
Yes, sure. I will
Then
send you a mail.
okay, great. Then I had a bunch of people showing interest if this was being streamed or if it was later online. So I told them that it would come online. I think. So great to see that that's happening.
Hopefully, by the end of day tomorrow, I will put it online.
It's fine. Take your time.
And thank you very much, Daniel, for a very informative session. And I hope you will also provide us with your precious time in future. So
I will.
thank you so much, and have a very nice day and a very nice weekend.